Welcome to the Leadership Launchpad Project. I'm Rob Kalwarowsky, and this week, Susan's not with us, but we have a special guest, the CEO and founder of Fresh Wellness Group, corporate consultant, speaker, and executive performance coach. Tim Borys is with us. Tim, how are you?
Quite well. Yeah, glad to be here, Rob.
Absolutely. And it's great to have you. And for folks out there, we always have to start off this show with a quote. And so I have one here from John Maxwell, of course, the leadership guru himself. And he says, when leaders fail to empower others, it is usually due to three main reasons. One, the desire for job security. Two, the resistance to change. And three, the lack of self-worth. Now, Tim, what do you think about the quote?
Love it. And I think it's a nail on the head in a few different areas. Uh, I, the the self-worth one really stuck with me at the end is I think a lot of people don't make the changes because they don't think themselves worthy. And I know I've struggled with that quite a bit over my life and my career. When in the workplace as well as on the sports side, it's easy to get into that self-deprecating cycle where you think nothing you do is good enough, and being able to pull yourself out of that is a skill that gets developed over time.
Absolutely. Maybe are you willing to share any strategies you use to overcome that?
Yeah, the part of it is looking back at the wins and successes you have had, reminding yourself that, hey, you have done some amazing things. And just because this isn't going well right now doesn't mean that you're not worthy or not a great person. And the other part is just having a support system around you that loves you unconditionally. That is important. Friends, family, coworkers that love you for who you are and know that your particular outcome in a given situation doesn't define who you are as a person. And so I think those are two of the biggest ones. And then I think the third one would be the self-care routines that you have. For me, it's going out for my morning walk, getting some fresh air, being in nature, exercise, planning my day, getting my just those general, what I call the foundational personal performance habits. I know when those start to go, my mindset starts um, to falter a little bit, and by keeping some of those pillars of my life in place, it helps me perform at higher level each day.
Totally. I also agree is like it starts with our habits and creating those key pieces is that's the foundation. And that keeps us at our best, which is how we can start to ripple that out. Now, Tim, you have an amazing background, and I would just love you to just tell us a little bit about yourself and how did you go from top baseball player to leadership coach?
Yeah, it's been a crazy journey over a lot of years. I started I was always an athlete. My parents had me in sports, multiple sports from a young age. And I have vivid memories of being on the soccer field in Vancouver and jumping into the van, changing in the back on the way to my hockey game, and doing that for a while. And then that was soccer hockey season. And then it was baseball and the summer, a little bit of skiing here and there. And so school sports. And so I was always active in something. And then I got into competitive baseball, played competitive hockey as well. Made the choice to pursue baseball when I was drafted. And so being in that environment, I just loved it. I thrived. The team environment, the challenging yourself, collaboration, the strategy. There's just so much of that in sports. And I think it builds self-worth and self-respect. You realize that in order to accomplish great things, you have to put in time and effort and focus and build your skills and overcome challenges. Those are skills that translate directly to business and leadership and the corporate world. But I didn't get there right away. I had some injuries that ended my baseball career, and I was blessed to have been on scholarship through university, and so I had university paid for. And when I left university and left baseball, I was like, I had no idea what to do with my life. And I had always, and I hadn't realized it up until that point, but my identity was so tied up in sports and athletics that I didn't really know how to function in the real world, I guess you would say. And so I had a bit of an identity crisis there, and it really started to take a hit on my self-confidence because I realized I was fully confident in anything to do with sports or physicality, and I could go do those things, and I knew that. But stepping into new areas that weren't sports related, I had this, I guess, a complex. Drawing a mind blank on the name. I can't remember it anymore. But yeah, just drawing a blank on the being able to step into other roles outside of sports was something that crushed me for a while. And I went traveling for 4 months and backpacked through Europe and the whole finding yourself thing. And I actually, it was, you can use the cliche all you want, but it was literally life changing. Got me out of that and really made me think about, okay, who am I outside of athletics? And as I started, I'd taken kinesiology and psychology through university, so I was personal training and in the fitness industry and working with elite athletes. I did end up becoming a strength conditioning coach for National Baseball Institute, working with lots of high end athletes, and that was great. And 30 plus years ago, when I was doing that, the financial aspect of it wasn't as lucrative as it is now. If you're LeBron James is a conditioning coach, you're probably making a bit more than the average personal trainer out there. But so I went into the health club industry and personal training. And at that time, the main people that hired personal trainers were corporate executives. So I got to experience a different side of the world that I had never really been in. I'd never had a corporate job. I was fresh out of university. I just finished backpacking, and I realized that these business executive, mostly guys, but there were some women there as well, were stressed out, burnt out, um, just really miserable in lots of areas of their life, despite being very successful in their businesses. And I thought, it's got to be a better way. Like there's, and for me, I love problem solving and I love looking at unique solutions. And so my mandate as a personal trainer at the time was people wanted to get fit and lose weight. Those are the top two reasons that people come to a trainer. And I'd give people these like amazing scientific programs and all the best advice. And some people saw results and other people didn't. And I was like, what's going on? And I started taking a step back and looking at, okay, well, what is it that they're doing when they're not with me? And started asking them and really getting them to give me a rundown of what their day looked like. And I realized very quickly that most of the stuff that I was doing in the sessions, the way I was approaching sessions by giving people great workouts and making them sweat, was useless. In fact, counterproductive for a lot of people because they weren't doing things that that they needed to outside of the sessions to be able to show up at the session in a way that we could do what I had planned for them. So I realized that, and this is where I came up with my 4 pillars of performance approach, is people come to a trainer for fitness and nutrition. And in fact, those are the least 2 important. My 4 pillars in order of importance are mindset, habits, movement, and fuel. And I specifically called the movement and fuel not fitness and nutrition, because there's much more to movement and fuel than just sweating and eating a healthy nutrition. And so as I was starting to help people understand those 4 pillars, the interesting thing happened is that they not only got their fitness and weight loss goals, but their work life improved, their marriage improved, their relationship with their kids improved, their health, their happiness. Overall, they just were thriving instead of losing a few pounds and getting a stronger bench press. And that was when my clients started saying, hey, I really like this approach. Can you come in and talk to my team at work about this? And so I started doing seminars and presentations about what I called personal performance and the 4 pillars. And then we ended up translating that into managing corporate fitness centers for large organizations. And so we'd be in these multinational companies, multi-million-dollar fitness center, look beautiful. We're seeing the same 10% of people that would be in the gym whether
totally.
the company had a gym anyway. And so then we started saying, well, what are we doing for the other 90% of people? And so we would run workplace wellness programs and different initiatives. And those are well received by the people that took them. But we kept hearing from people that, you know what? The gym's amazing. I'd love to come, but my boss wouldn't look kindly on it if I worked out during the day. And I've got kids, so I can't come in the morning. I can't come in the evening, and with the schedule and blah, blah, blah. And I started hearing more and more of this and realized that there was this barrier in place to people being able to implement the 4 pillars because of either policies, procedures, status quo within the organization of how things were done. I guess you'd call that the corporate culture. And more importantly, leadership mindset around this. And I found that a lot of even the healthy, active, fit leaders, they're like, well, I'm already doing this. It's everyone else, their individual responsibility. They should be doing that. And so I started saying, okay, we're not able to make the impact that we want to do. And I got into the industry to help people thrive. And work was the number one reason they were not thriving, most specifically their boss. And as I looked more and more into that, I realized that that leadership was the thing that needed to change. And so by going back to school and getting my executive coaching certifications, I realized that I could now put more of this scientific rigor and structure to the coaching and training that I've been doing with these same corporate executives for decades. And now I'm really passionate about helping leaders not just thrive personally, but to help their teams thrive. And a huge part of that is how they show up as a leader, mindset, the habits, and yes, the movement and fuel from the personal side, but being able to help their teams do those things as well. And to use that as a tool from a people performance standpoint, but then ultimately the organizational performance, because we know hands down that when we have healthy, happy, engaged, high performing people, the company is more profitable. And so that's where I've ended up now doing the consulting. I call it organizational performance consulting and executive leadership coaching.
Awesome. Tim, when you start working with leaders and maybe they aren't all bought into, the fitness element or even their mindset around, you should be working 12 hours a day or those type of things. Like, how do you start transitioning them into thinking, like even stuff like recovery is something I talk a lot with my leaders is like, you can't run flat out for weeks on end. It's just not possible. Like, how do you start building that mindset of the peaks and the valleys and, you know, ensuring that we're implementing those healthy habits?
Yeah, it's I often go back to the athletic side, and people often resonate with those examples. And I'll say, like, you guys you're familiar with Usain Bolt, right? Yeah, like fastest sprinter in the world, blah blah blah. Like, what if you said to Usain Bolt, "Hey, I know like you're under 10 seconds or 9 whatever 5 for the 100 meters. You're going to be a failure if you don't do that for 10 kilometers. Like, I want you to run a 10-second 100-meter for 10 kilometers." They're like, "Well, of course that's impossible." And I'm like, "Well, why are you expecting your teams to do that?" You know, Usain Bolt runs 100 meters and then he rests and recovers and mobilizes and does all these different other tools to be able to run that fast. When if you do a set at the gym, if you're doing squats, yeah, you can lift a certain amount of weight, but you can't lift that all day, every day. And that's where we need to, in order to perform at their best, the top athletes do that recovery. They have their massage therapists, their physical therapists, the sports psychologists. They have all these team members behind them that help build the foundation for them to perform at their best. And they are only performing at their best for those specific competitions they choose. Now, they bring that performance down a little bit. And yeah, Usain Bolt could probably run a pretty decent 10K if he wanted to. But is he going to be as fast as the top 10K runners in the world? Probably not. And that's okay. What's our expectation about what we're asking our people to do? And knowing that any performance requires recovery, requires regeneration. And as long as we set the stage for what our expectations are, we can make sure that we're building our team and their skill set and their mindset and their habits to perform at the level that we need to.
And so, I mean, obviously, I love the sports analogy, and it's something that we talk about a lot, but maybe you can enlighten us a bit. Like, what did you learn from being not only just an elite athlete yourself, but also coaching elite athletes that you bring into the leadership space?
I think the first one is that everyone's unique, everyone's individual, and you have to adapt your coaching style to that individual to bring the best out in them. And I see this from athletes. I see it in when I was a personal trainer in the gym. Some people like the drill sergeant where they're yelling at them like, "God, come on, do this," and they love that high energy, combative. And you do that with this next person, and they're going to crumple. They're not. That's not what they want. They need a little more high touch, measured approach. And so, being able to understand, first of all, what is it we're trying to help them accomplish, and who are they as a person, and what's the best path to get there for that individual person. And the best coaches, the best leaders understand that, and they know their teams inside and out, and they know what makes them tick. They know what motivates them, what drives them, and they're able to provide the environment where those people thrive.
Yeah, I love that, and it's all about actually the individual goals is incredibly important because it's one of the drivers to engagement. Now, Tim, you work a lot with culture change or change initiatives. Like, do you want to talk a little bit about that? Like, for leaders out there, if they're trying to change that status quo or implement a new whatever, CMMS, SAP, whatever it is, like some sort of digital transformation. Where should folks start on that change management process, and how should it go throughout its life cycle?
Well, it's a pretty big
It's a good
question there.
question.
There are all kinds of change management models out there, with like Prosky and ADKAR and nudge theory, and you've got Kotter's 8 steps for leading change and McKinsey's 7S framework. And whichever one you follow doesn't really matter as long as you're understanding the bigger picture. You obviously, what is it you're trying to change? What's the desired outcome? I see these things pop up in the AI is putting my thumb up. But yeah, do you understand what you're trying to accomplish? What's the endpoint look like? What steps need to happen in between there, not just on the technology side or the um, tactical side? What are the people changes? Where do people need to go from a mindset standpoint to get from point A to point B? There's the concept of in order to do something new, you essentially have to become something new, and you have to think about the world in a different way. So how do we help people facilitate that mindset shift that is going to get them to change their work processes they might have been doing for decades, to change their thought process about who they are and what their contribution to the organization is? There are so many layered nuances of change that go beyond just implementing a new software system. And when leaders can understand that it's not about the software system, it's about the people implementing the software system. And I find, especially when we get very technical leaders in the IT space, from the software implementation side is a great example. They're like, yes, of course this is going to be better. It's going to save us this time and save us this money and blah, 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 blah. And they forget to look at how is it impacting the people? And on the flip side, we can get a lot of HR coming in and saying, oh, it's all about the people. And they forget about that there's like a practical business solution that has to be solved here. And there's financial impacts and there are organizational and operational impacts. So to be able to step back and see the bigger picture and how all that fits together, and great leaders are the ones that are able to take all those pieces, understand where they fit, and direct and inspire the teams to smoothly integrate all of those things is the challenge. And all the different models I mentioned earlier take that into consideration. But how are we, the practical reality of how that's implemented is where the consulting money is made, I guess you would say.
I suppose it depends what type of consulting, because some of them, they just write you the whole thing and then drop it on your desk and walk out the door.
Yeah, totally. And that's, the reorg. Here's your reorg structure. Now, go do it. And it's the practical day-to-day implementation. And this is where some of those larger consulting firms will come in, and if they've come in and done it all for you and then just like hand you the keys, it's easy for it to fall apart because you haven't been as part of the process. Whereas, if you look at more of a facilitator role, where you come in and you help them create the strategy, you help them really clarify the goals and the outcomes and what are the steps that have to happen and like the procedural stuff. But then from a change management standpoint, looking at what's the soft squishy stuff that needs to happen in between for the people, the behavioral change, the managing emotions and expectations and changes in roles, helping leaders or facilitating that process for leaders, helping them have tough conversations instead of having them for them. It's like the companies that come in and downsizing and they bring in the HR axe like chopper to lay off all these people. And this consultant comes in and just like fires people in a room one after the other for days on end. And here's your package, and the security walks you out. And I'm like, come on. Like that is just so horrible. And it's a horrible experience for everyone. By being able to connect with people on a human standpoint and it, have tough conversations. They have to happen. Like downsizing has to happen sometimes, but doing it through a third party firm, I've never been a huge fan of that. And
Tim,
yeah,
I totally agree. And I have no research to back this up, but my feeling is that having tough conversations is something that folks are more reticent to do in 2024 than they were in, I don't know, 2005. And like we see this rise of, you know, ghosting from candidates to jobs. We see inversely from jobs to candidates, like, hey, you're going to go start on Monday. And then it's like, oh, actually, no. Have you, how's that progressed in your eyes over the years? And what are some of the kind of mindset tricks that you could tell to leaders that are like, that'll actually get them to have that conversation?
yeah, that's a great question. If we start at how do you think it's changed in the call it the past 15 to 20 years? I think people have always been hesitant to have tough conversations. I think recently, maybe some of the reasons have changed. In the past, it was like, well, it's just uncomfortable and it puts me outside of my comfort zone. So it's easier to just like abdicate responsibility for it. I think more recently, there's an awareness that people's buckets are full in terms of the emotional impact and load, the rapid pace of change that's happening, and stress. We know that stress and burnout, like the stats are showing that they're just increasing. So these tough conversations seem to add to that stress and burnout. I think, you know, on the DEIB side, I think there's more of a challenge for leaders to wade into areas that they aren't as comfortable with anymore, that they might be worried about stepping on. What I've heard leaders say is stepping on landmines,
Yeah.
and opening challenges and conversations that maybe they didn't even know were there or don't want to proceed, and so it's just easier to not deal with it. And then if we shift to what are the strategies, I always come back to tough conversations need to be human to human. And when you meet someone on a human level, take away all the title stuff and the, you know, bureaucracy, when you can really just connect with someone on a human basis, it's easier to have that tough conversation. And even in my business, I've had to let people go, sometimes for cause, other times just because things shifted and the business couldn't support that anymore. And I've made some mistakes in the past where they've come back to haunt me, and I'm, you know, being able to just be honest and sincere and genuine and understand from a leadership standpoint what the other person is going through and how they may be taking it, and asking those questions. It's okay. When I've done it well, I've had people come back to me and say, thank you so much. Like that was while it was challenging at the time, I really appreciated the how it was done and how you handled it. On the flip side, I've let people go that I thought I didn't think it was a big deal at all, and 5 years later, 10 years later, they're still pissed off at me, and I'm like, okay, I didn't even realize it was a big deal, and it's funny. There's been one or two times where that's happened, and I've since gone back and connected with those people and been able to really be like, hey, you know what? Thank you so much for letting me know. I had no idea at the time. I'm learning as a leader as well, and hopefully I've improved and grown since then. And that experience was one of the things that helped me grow as a leader. And it's okay to admit you don't have all the answers. And I think that's something that leaders often hold on to, is that I need to know it all. I need to be the source of truth. And great leaders are the ones that are like, hey, you know what? I don't know. Let's figure it out together. And that's what we're here to do as a team.
I love
Not sure
that.
if that
Yeah.
answered your question.
No, no, no. I really love your vulnerability, and it's true, right? Like we all make mistakes, and the biggest piece, right, is having that self-awareness that we can learn from those behaviors and improve them. And that's why, like, even as much as I talk about, asshole bosses, it's like, it's not the person, it's the behaviors. And we can learn and choose to change our behaviors because that's literally what growth is, right? Like, we've all done this at some point in our lives, right? We learned how to walk, we fell down a bunch of times, we got up, right? Same thing with bicycles or, learning whatever, anything. And so I just think like that's the biggest piece is, being able to look at ourselves and go, you know what, this needs to improve or change and just keep growing because that's really the game.
Well, as I was talking about that, it brought me back to this probably one of the most impactful leadership lessons I learned very early. I had just started my company, and I'd hired, I guess about a year or so before that, I'd hired my first employee, and we went through a pretty big growth phase where I guess in a year we went from one employee to 8 or 9 employees. And so taking on all these responsibilities and just juggling all the balls and the hats, trying to figure out how to be a leader. Because I'd never really had to lead people at that point. And remember there was one employee who was fantastic, and I can't even remember what he did at this point. He did something where it was like, whoa, he made a mistake, and then he made a judgment call to go do something that I didn't think was right and that wasn't good for the business. And we were having a team meeting, and it's like, 10 of us in this room, me and the 9 employees. And I'm like, oh, okay. And I'm thinking, okay, I'm this big boss now. And I had to, lay down the law, and I had this mindset for a reason that I had to like come in and be like, authoritative. And so in the middle of this meeting, I basically tore a strip off him and was like, this is unacceptable and blah, blah, blah. And you could just see everyone around the table going like, what the hell is happening? And we finished the meeting, and it was so uncomfortable for me, for everyone. And then I had 3 of the employees come up to me after and be like, what was that? Like, like, you've never been like that. What was going on? And he was really pissed off and embarrassed, and I had to go back and meet with him separately. And after these other employees came up with me, I knew it wasn't right in the moment, but then when they came up, I was like, oh yeah, okay, I totally see that. And so I went and talked to him separately, and then I talked to those other 3 people that came, and then at the next team meeting, I apologized profusely. I'm like, hopefully it was not as awkward for you as it was for me in that moment, but it was like, yeah, I realized now that this was not the way this situation should have been handled. And I realized that in that moment, I was the type of leader that was very much B type and just like, relationship based. And I tried to be something that I wasn't in that moment. And it
Mhm.
was glaringly obvious that it didn't work. And I also now obviously understanding a bit more of the leadership science and structure, I was like, yeah, I berated the person in the moment, not the action. I made it public instead of private first. And there were so many other issues with that situation, but that sticks with me to this day. And that was over 20 years ago. And yeah, we see that every day. Leaders feel they need to act or behave in a certain way because of their title or because of might be what's expected of them rather than just being human.
Yeah, and that's hard, right? And it's like we watch TV and we see leaders in this way, or like I'm sure some of your coaches, just like mine, were folks who yelled at people, right? So you screwed up, like you're whatever. And it's like we learn those strategies. And then when we're in this position of leadership, we're like, well, that's how you do it because that's what I've seen. And it does take that element of like the self awareness that everybody listening thinks they have, but only about 12 to 15% of people actually have self awareness, right? It's like that's a skill. And that's where, we often start. Well, we always start when I'm coaching folks is self awareness and growing that, because what you said in the middle of the show about who we are and being who we are, and we can always change and grow into who we want to become. But that's ultimately the big thing, because you just mentioned it. I was playing a role that wasn't me. And that's where, once we start to cultivate who we are, then we don't play roles anymore.
And that's understanding your personal values and your challenging your belief systems that maybe aren't producing the outcomes that you want. And yeah, I often say to leaders, I'm like, if you're rocking it in every area of life and you're thriving and like you never have problems, I'm like, you're probably not very self-aware. And if you keep facing the same problem over and over, one of the best things to do is look in the mirror, because you're probably the common denominator in that. And so what can we do and grow and improve? But that's, yeah, understanding what our core values are and how we need to better align with those values. Because I had someone explained to me or defined to me the definition of stress is the farther we are from reality to actual, or sorry, perception to actual. And so if we are, again, perfectly aligned with what we're doing, we don't have the stress in the negative way that we normally would. But if we want to be there and we're really over here, the further you stretch from that, the higher the stress gets. And that can be in any area of life, whether it's financial or relationship or job expectations, or yeah, it's so being able to identify that and then take the steps to
That's a
change it.
cool. And yeah, I've never heard that, but I'm going to noodle on it now. I'm thinking about it. Tim, before we get you out of here, we got to ask you the question we ask to everybody that comes on this show is, what do you want your legacy to be?
That's a good one. As I mentioned before, I got into health fitness industry to help people thrive and to transform their lives. So from a legacy standpoint, to impact millions and millions of people around the world and positively impact them and help them realize that life is awesome and packed with unlimited potential that we have control over changing. And so for me, that's why I do what I do. That's what gets me up every day.
Amazing. So awesome. And for folks out there, if you want to connect with Tim, I've dropped his podcast in the I've dropped his LinkedIn in the podcast notes, and wherever you're listening to Leadership Launchpad, definitely just search for Working Well podcast, and you hit subscribe to Tim's podcast. In non-podcast world time, we just recorded it, so you'll be able to check that out. I don't know when ours and that one will come out, but we'll see. But check that out. And then you can also check out timborys.com and freshgroup.ca for other spaces to find Tim. Is there anywhere else you want folks to find you?
Those are the main places. Yeah. LinkedIn, timborys.com, and of course the Working Well podcast. And you can find that at timborys.com.
Awesome. And obviously for us, hit subscribe to Leadership Launchpad Project and share it with any leaders in your life. And then also for one-on-one executive coaching, group leadership programs, and all things leadership, head on over to elitehighperformance.com for all of that. And folks, where I want to just land the plane this week is where we went with Tim, right? Is being vulnerable and self-aware just with yourself. That's the unlock to the highest levels of performance, because you're going to see those gaps. You're going to be able to work towards closing them, but it always starts with the awareness first. And so if you need help with self-awareness, you're welcome to reach out to Tim or I. You're also welcome to just start tuning in and seeing where you come. Everyone, thank you so much for listening. Tim, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Rob. It's been my pleasure.
Everybody, thanks for listening, and we'll see you all next week.